Genesis chapter 6 tonight. Let's pray. And Lord, we thank you for your word and ask by your great grace you would open unto us the mighty things that your Spirit is saying through the word. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, Genesis chapter 6, verse 1. Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth that daughters were born to them. Now, if you think about it and just say, let's do this, let's work this mathematically. We're dealing with 1,600 years at this point. And so if you conservatively do the math and say Adam and Eve just had 4 kids, and each of their kids had 4 kids, and everybody lived to be 70 years old. Let's just, sort of some real simple numbers like we would have today. If you do the math, it starts out really slow. In the first 5 generations, you have 96 people. Then in 10 generations, you have 370 people. 20 generations, you have 3 million people. But then all of a sudden, the math just starts going crazy. And you go from 3,150,000 people in the 20th generation to the 30th generation, 3,220,000 people. So let's be honest, though. People weren't living to be 70 years old. We saw in the genealogy last week that if you average out the ages of that genealogy in chapter 5, you're about 800 years is about how long somebody was living. And we know when we were looking at Adam and Eve, some of these guys were up into 500 years old, still having kids. Okay? So really what we're talking about here is not an average lifetime time of 70 years, but 800 years. And we're not talking people having probably 4 kids, but dozens, maybe hundreds of kids each. So if you bump that even just a tiny bit and say everybody is having 8 kids, you're up by the 1,600 years, you're up to a population that's, billions, 15, 20 billion people. Okay? And let's just remember a few unique things at this time before the flood. The earth probably wasn't covered with as much ocean as it is now. 70% of our earth is covered in water. As we're going to look at the flood, the waters from underneath burst and above. So there probably was more land. By seeing how the animals got on the ark, it doesn't appear that the animals were carnivorous at this point, eating each other. It would have been a pretty bloody scene on the ark had it been otherwise. So things were pretty unique at this time. People were living very long. There wasn't probably a lot of the diseases that we know of now. And of course, as man continues to go on in time, mutations begin to grow. So, Abraham's married to his half-sister, Sarah. But then the time you get to the time of Moses, he's got to say, hey, no more of this brother and sister marrying people anymore. So we start seeing the mutations of things happening. And so this was a unique time on earth that actually said people probably could have lived healthier and longer than really what we could even imagine. But I'll tell you what, I couldn't imagine, 800 years worth of Monday mornings. You know what I mean? It's like, wouldn't you have already been through Netflix and Amazon and have seen every possible scenario in sitcoms the time you're 300 years old? I don't know what you could really do. It would have been a very different life. And I don't know I really don't know how the mind of man worked. It's pretty phenomenal to me. But we go on to see that these sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful. And they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Now, the knee-jerk reaction of interpretation of this is God is just saying, I'm going to limit the length of man's life, so it's no more than 120. Because I'm dealing with men when they're getting up 500 and 600 and 800 years old. I don't want to do that anymore. Some say that this is God hitting the timer for Noah spending 120 years till he builds the ark. But if you do the math from the genealogy of Noah and to the flood, it actually wouldn't have been 120 years that Noah would have been building the flood. It would have been right around 100 years. So I do think this is God saying, I'm just going to limit the length of man's life on the earth over the average. And of course, you know, we've gone through centuries where the average length of man's life was under 40. Of course, today it's creeping back up. The average length of life of a man in the United States is 78. For a woman, it's 81. But God's just saying the hundreds of years old men living, not going to happen anymore. Now there were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Now in verse 4, this word giant is in the Hebrew, the word Nephilim. And in its root, it's fallen ones. But it's definitely the word also translated giants. Now, this term in verse 2, sons of God. There are some that try to go back and to say this is referring to the children of Seth, Adam and Eve's latest child. And Seth's lineage was having children, and their children were having children, and they were becoming great people. But when you really begin to look at it, it cannot be that. And I understand there's certain people that have a very strong sense of how this is to be interpreted. I don't ever want to be dogmatic on things that can't 100% be proven. But my sense, and as I've taught through this for 35 years, I haven't changed my opinion, because the word sons of God, the only time it's ever used is that of angels. It's not referring to men. Matter of fact, in Job chapter 1, verse 6, it says, now there was in the day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, that Satan also came among them. So this is clearly angels, and the word sons of God is referring to God's angels. And Satan at that time, I don't understand the whole spiritual realm and space and time and all of that, but Satan was able to still participate at those roundtable meetings there. In chapter 2 of Job, again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And then the same thing, Satan also came. And in Job 38:7, it says, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. So referring again to the angels there at the beginning of creation. Now, we find in Jude and in Peter some interesting things concerning these fallen angels that had, I believe, sex with women. And this is what Jude is referring to. And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day, as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities also around them in similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh and set forth an example, suffering the vengeance of the eternal fire. So he sort of correlates and says there's these angels that cross the line. And those angels that crossed the line, I think he's referring to the proper domain, had sex with women and had children from those union that God destroyed in the flood. That he locked them up and said, you're not going to have freedom on the earth anymore. We find in the book of Revelation there are certain demons that are released that also were sort of under arrest, if you would, that were able to come out during the tribulation period. And you say, well, doesn't it say in Matthew 22 that one day when we are in our new bodies that we will be like the angels, and they'll neither be male nor female or taken in marriage? Yes, but it didn't mean they wouldn't be sexual beings. It just simply said for eternity, we won't be participating in that type of life anymore. We do see throughout the Bible consistently angels appearing as young men. And so in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which he sort of compares these angels who left their proper domain to what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, if you remember, 2 angels came in to get Lot and his family, and they appeared as young men. And the men, from young to old of the city, almost pushed to break Lot's house down because they were so sexually driven to get new flesh that finally they blinded the men. And even in a blinded state, they were still groping, trying to get these guys. And the angels grabbed Lot and his family and ran him out of town. And so it's hard to imagine. But from what I can read here, it's that these angels, not typically sexual beings, but fallen angels, did have the capacity for that and knew that there were limits to what they could participate with on earth, as we know in the story of Job, where Satan says, hey, let me at Job, and God says, oh, no, you can't touch Job. Okay, I'll let you touch Job, but only to this degree. That these demons were given limitations, and when they cross that line, they're not able to, they're locked up. They're put in chains in darkness and not able to roam on the earth anymore. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 and 5, it says, for if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into the chains of darkness to reserve for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of the 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly. And obviously he's in the middle of a thought there. But again, he sort of mentions these angels who sinned, who were locked up in darkness, and then the flood came. It does seem to be alluding to this thought process again. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 19 to 20, by whom also he went and preached to the spirits in prison, who formerly were disobedient, who once the divine long-suffering waited for the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 souls, were saved through the water. So as we go into this passage in Peter, when Jesus preached the gospel 3 days and 3 nights in Sheol, in the belly of the earth, that on not only the men who had died before that period, from Adam to present time when Christ had died, were able to hear the gospel, but even these fallen angels were able to hear from the mouth of Jesus also the gospel before he rose again and went into heaven. So there's some interesting things. Again, it's like, when the angels appeared before God and Satan also appeared and said, hey, what do you think of my servant Job? Again, there's just certain things that the Bible hasn't given us all information on angels, on heaven, on hell, on life after death. We don't have all the information. We have pieces of the puzzle, necessary pieces for what we need to know at this time. So we see in part. It says in 1 Corinthians 13, we know in part. But one day, when we're out of this body, present with the Lord, we'll see clearly and understand it all. But evidently, it is Satan's desire to get certain fallen angels to try to pollute the human gene pool. I believe personally, because remember in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15, as soon as Adam and Eve fell, God said, and Eve, through your seed, salvation is going to come, referring to the Messiah. And so I think Satan, if he can just completely pollute the human gene pool with this demonic seed and to try to thwart in some twisted way God from bringing the Messiah, as we know, in a pure gene pool through the tribe of Judah. We do see later on in the book of Joshua that word Nephilim used again. It appears that these angels, even after the flood, tried to do this. Saw the giants, the descendants, the Nephilim again, the descendants of Anak came from giants and who were like grasshoppers in our sight. So we were in their sight. So remember when God said to the children of Israel, when you go into the promised land, either the people of that land completely leave and separate themselves from you, or you kill them. Do not intermarry. Do not have anything to do with them. As we go on and read, we know part of it has to do with bestiality and what kind of crazy diseases were coming from that. But evidently part of the reason, again, God wanted to make sure they had no mixture was, again, we see that Satan is trying to pollute the human gene pool again, it appears, through combining these fallen angels with women, creating this giants, and eventually we see Goliath and so forth, these pagan, vicious, blasphemous creatures that, again, God wiped out from the earth. So if you're sort of tripping right now going, man, I have never heard this before. Well, it's not really covered again, so you have to hear it twice. It is bizarre. I know, and you can go look at several commentaries. There are a couple other explanations, but none of them as clear as the one I gave, even though the one I just gave is very bizarre. And so I'm feeling it too, okay? It's not just you. It is, but that's Satan, man. Satan is just bizarre dude. And he just, I mean, his main thing is he just wants to so weird you out that you just throw out the baby with the bathwater and just like, I don't want anything to do with anything spiritual. It's all bizarre. You know, that's Satan you can't beat him. He joins him and tries to weird it out. Remember when Paul and Silas were preaching and this lady was traveling with them and screaming out, listen to these men, they're of God. They preach the way of truth. And she's for 3 days with them proclaiming everybody to listen to him. And on the third day, Paul finally, bing, that's a demon spirit. You know, I just thought she was on fire. You know, new Christians can be a little enthusiastic, a little zealous without wisdom, and just, you know, and you just go to say, well, it just let it go because they're excited and a little bizarre, but they're excited, you know, let it go. But it wasn't that. And it took Paul 3 days to discern it was actually a demon proclaiming everybody to listen to them in this twisted psychological game to just cause people to run away from her intensity of telling them to listen until he casts the demon out of this woman. So this is the kind of trippy things Satan does. He's out to kill, steal, and destroy. He's trying to divide and conquer. Always trying to divide, whether it's a marriage, parents to the kids, or kids to the parents, or brother to brother, or sister to brother, what family in the church, in any way he can. He's always trying to weaken the units that God's put together. And again, man is living hundreds of years old, and this whole civilization has just gotten huge in the population, but crazy wicked in their lifestyle. And so when we read the genealogy of chapter 5 and we're seeing these guys and Enoch, was 65 years old. He had a child. And then for 300 years, he walked with God. We need to understand that he was walking with God while mutant creatures were walking around him. Why people were just sexually deviant and violent and wicked. God was literally a few years away of just destroying the whole planet. That Enoch was walking with God. And you got this guy Methuselah who lived 969 years old. And we're probably talking almost his entire life. I mean, maybe hundreds of years of that, maybe the whole of it. He was walking uphill against the wind in this wicked and perverted generation year after year. And he just never stopped walking with God. So I can't imagine fighting my flesh, fighting the devil, fighting this world system for 300 years in this body. I mean, does that just blow your mind or what? But to do it in almost 1,000 years. And Methuselah, we're going to discover the year that he died is the year the flood came. So Methuselah was this guy that probably went to Grandma and Grandpa Adam and Eve's house for a few hundred years, knew the stories. Then he was probably, hoisting pitch up to Noah, helping him build this ark. And so we're talking. It's just mind-boggling when you really start stepping back and looking at what's going on here. And we see in verse 5 here that then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. And Jesus tells us later that in the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. So really, as we're looking at the days before the flood, this whole spirit of that age was going to repeat itself to the point that earth again couldn't be redeemed because of the population of the world, because of the violence of the world, because of the sexual wickedness of the world, and that we also would be living in a generation like Noah and Enoch and Methuselah lived in. And that's when we're there, we realize God's not going to flood the earth again, but he is going to rapture the believers out. And in Matthew 24, listen to this in verse 36 to 44. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For in the days before the flood, they were eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. It did not know until the flood came and took away all away, so also when will the coming of the Son of Man be. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So as we're going to continue to read through Genesis 6, we find that it was a sexually perverted generation. It was a demonic activity going on in this generation. There was a constant evil in the heart of man. There was a widespread corruption and violence. And there was an exploding population. We're definitely capped with that population thing. I mean, if you look at the population of Earth, they estimate starting at Noah getting off the ark until 1850. It took that long before we saw the first billion people. But after that, we got that first billion people from 1850 to 1935. Just 85 years, we got another billion. But then what happened? It only took 30 years to get the next billion. And then it only took 10 years after that to get another billion. And then it only took 10 years after that to get another billion. And so if you look at the stats of the Census Bureau, the international database, you can see that basically every 10 years we grow almost a billion people. And you can see from 1950, it was about a 20%, 18.9% a year world population explosion. From 1960, 22% growth in the world. 1970, 20%. 1980, 18%. And you see now that, I mean, basically what they've been saying since 1990 is with the 70% of the world being covered with water and the amount of usable land we have that can actually grow stuff on and get water to, which is a difficult thing, getting harder every year. Even where it rains like crazy and there's tons of lakes, they still have water shortage getting to the actual locations where they can grow stuff. Because you can't grow stuff in frozen tundra, and you can't grow stuff in the, Saudi Arabia desert. And a lot of the land of the earth that you used to be able to grow on, you can't anymore because you have to. I grew up in a farming community, and farmers are scientists. I mean, you got to know what you can grow, and you can only grow it for so long, and you got to grow something different. But the next thing you've got to grow has to replace the nutrients that you sucked out of the soil from the last crop. So farmers just can't say, oh yeah, I'm going to grow this and grow that and grow that and grow that, because they could end up sucking the same nutrients, although there's different things they're farming, out of the soils. And again, if you're dealing with a garden in your backyard, you just go get a bag of stuff and pour in there and do what you can. But when you're dealing with literally millions of acres, which is not really the small farmer too much anymore, it's usually giant enterprises that are farming. They got scientists trying to make sure that our land is producing. And it's not an easy thing. Even in the best of soil, it's still a very difficult thing to do. And so in the parts of the world that are at war, they've destroyed their farmland, in Somalia, 50 years ago, and to try to get that land back to produce at any rate again, it's not an easy thing to do. And so when you look at the population of the world and how much you can actually farm and the water resources, and they're saying that we really hit maximum capacity decades ago. And so now you see in the world population, every country, especially like China and India, they are just doing everything they can to stop population. And then in the rest of the world, we've just gotten selfish. People, your typical American doesn't want to have more than 1 or 2 kids because it would quench their lifestyle. And so they just don't want to do it it takes 2.3 kids to reproduce yourself. So if you have 2 kids, you're actually causing your DNA to go extinct. And so there's some really fun websites to watch on that, but I won't go there. But either way, the world, we hit a population explosion in the 1980s and the 70s really, and since then, we've been having to slam on the brakes And now we're at 18, 15, 12, 10, 8, 7, even at growing at only 5%. We're still almost growing a 500 million people or more a year. So we are at a time like the days of Noah, where the earth was saturated with people, and violence in the world it's insane. I mean, you are literally, almost anywhere you go in the world, afraid of the most ruthless violence and evil coming to your door. And it's not as bad in our country as in most of the world, but it's still, I don't think any of us think that the worst of evil couldn't reach our house. I think we all think, yeah, it very well could, right? And we're locking up people at a rate that's already bankrupting us. Every year, to keep somebody in juvenile or in prison, it's costing us well over $100,000, getting closer to $200,000 per inmate to continue. And that number is growing and growing and growing. And what's their answer? Don't hold them anymore. Let them go. And so we're creating an entire generation of people that have been incarcerated. And I worked in the prison for 4 years. And once you get that prison mentality in your head, I don't think you can ever recover from it. There's some degree that criminal element stays with you in your thinking. That survival instinct, that violent ability to protect yourself and to survive. And so, I worked with inmates in the prison for years, and I worked with them out of prison. And to stay out of prison once you've been in is almost impossible. Over 80% of people who get out of prison go back to prison. It's a very small percentage that actually prosper after they've been in prison. There's some that don't go back to prison, but they don't typically do great once they get a prison on their rap. And that's growing. So, I'm not wanting here to bum everybody out tonight going, oh, crap, let's go get a gun and get extra locks on our doors. And I'm simply saying this. If there's any doubt, we are in the days of Noah. Just go pull up online what's going on with crime in the world and violence in the world. Nowhere on the planet is it like leveling off or getting less. Like, wow, we have less crime this year than we did 10 years ago. It's not happening anywhere in the world. Less murders or whatever. There might be little pockets here and there, but it's a time that we are experiencing the days of Noah. And I had a pastor last week ask me that. He's like, they've been saying for a long time the Lord's coming back. I said, no, it really hasn't been a long time. It really was in the late 1800s that really in church history people started really focusing on teaching the coming of the Lord. And it really wasn't until the 1900s that most of the doctrinal positions we have, like pre-trib and most post-trib and post or mid and post-trib, that really have been developed. So most of the theology we have on the second coming of Christ has really been developed even in the last 50, 60 years. And some people poo-poo that by saying, well, the early church fathers didn't talk about it. They didn't need to. They weren't in the days we're in. It's again, this is something that as you look at what the Bible says concerning the second coming of Christ, it doesn't take much to realize we are there. There's two civilizations. Look at the days of Noah. Look at the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. Look at those two societies and ask yourself, are you living in a world society heading in the direction of those two cultures? And you've got to be deaf, dumb, and blind to not read the scriptures and to see that we are there. I think if the Lord came back tomorrow, we wouldn't be going, oh, that was really soon. I thought, this would still be to happen before. No, guys, it's there. Everything the Bible said that would happen before the second coming of Christ has happened, and we are experiencing it. And it is a tough, tough generation to follow the Lord. But here's the grace in this, in verse 8. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. I'll tell you what, that's one of the most encouraging verses in the book of Genesis. Because every one of you here that are born again tonight, you are that person. No one comes unto me, Jesus says, unless the Father draws him. If you are here right now and you're willing to say, Jesus is the Lord of my life, it's because God has given you grace in his eyes. And he knocked on the door of your heart until it was tender, and you opened that door and you welcomed his Son to be the Savior of your life. And Noah was one of those guys in the midst of a crazy, wicked, perverse generation. He's got his family. He's trying to follow the Lord. He's got Enoch and Methuselah and other people that have come and gone in his life, and he's trying to just push forward. And so in this is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in generations. Noah walked with God. There you go. You want to know about hundreds of years, of the 600 years almost that Noah lived? Let me tell you about his life. He walked with God. You say, well, put some meat on that bones. That is the meat. In Micah 6:8, reducing all of the laws and the commandments and all of the theologies of the entire Bible, reduces down in just a sentence. Has he not shown you, O man, what is good? What does the Lord require of you? But to do justly, to do what is right in God's eyes. I know that everybody else on the planet says, this is that. Noah had to say, I'm not listening to anybody on the earth. Everybody's wrong. Everybody in the media is wrong. All the scientists that are saying evolution and the Big Bang and all that, they're full of crap. They're liars. They're deceivers. They're hard-hearted. They say they believe in God. They don't obey him. And we've got to just cut everything else away and get our eyes on the Lord. Because we are in a generation that is claiming they're righteous with God, but their works say otherwise. Their lifestyle says otherwise. The way they're living, how they're raising their kids. D.L. Moody said, I don't need to hear a man's testimony, whether God's first in his life. Just hand me his checkbook. I'll tell you whether he gives tithes and offerings, whether he really is putting God first in his life. Because I found a lot of men that said, God's first, but yet they won't walk by faith in their tithes and offerings. And so there's just this generation of people that, again, are self-righteous, that redefined righteousness, but they're not walking with God. And Noah was a man that had to literally cut everybody and every voice loose and just say, as for me, I'm going to do what's right in God's eyes, and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. The Bible tells us that Noah, for that 100 years, was a preacher of righteousness, and that God kept the door to that ark open until the rain started. The door was open to anybody who would come, let them come. The animals walked on. That had to have been an amazing thing. When you really think about the ark, okay, and how huge it was, especially in those days, and how it stuck out. I got a feeling that everybody on the planet Earth knew about Noah and probably in some way, shape, or form came to try to see what in the world was this guy doing. Well, in verse 10, Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Cheryl and I had 3 sons too. And the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all the flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, cover it inside and out with pitch. And this is how you will make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. And you shall make a window for the ark, and shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark in its side. And you shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. So if you would, picture a 30-story building. The other day I was downtown and had to go up to a 20-story building. And there was really nothing around. It was really the tallest building, at least where I was at, and I could see most of downtown and Coronado and the bridge. It looked like I could just reach out and touch it. And that's 20 stories. 30 stories is just, it's huge. So, I mean, it would be 450 feet long, and it would be 75 feet wide and 45 feet high. So that's an 18 inches. It was the elbow to the fingertips of the king. So it could vary depending on who was the king, but most people say right around 3 feet, 18 inches is what they would give on that. So it's interesting that if you do the math, it's a 6-to-1 ratio, which is exactly the ratio we ended up figuring out through time that we make all our ships to this day. If you see a giant ship, whatever it is, it's to the same ratio that we see here. Nothing this large was built until 1858 after this ark. And it was definitely big enough to do the job. If you think about it, if it carried every family of animals, it'd be about 700 pairs of animals. That's all it would take. So it wasn't like you had to have every species of cat. You just had to have the one cat. It's just like with Adam and Eve, and then also with Noah and his kids, they had every type of human within their DNA. So what color they were and their eyes and their ears, I don't know. But within them, within Adam and Eve and within the next generations, they had, Asian people and African people and European. They had every type of nationality and ears and eyes and color of hair and body types and all that within their DNA. In the same way, you didn't need every kind of buffalo or every kind of elephant. You just needed one species, and within that one species was all the other ones that could evolve from them. And there's macroevolution, which I reject, and there's microevolution, which again, definitely we see the changing within the species. Not that a species becomes from one species to a different species, from a cat to a dog, but yet we can see various types of species throughout the world. But if you wanted to carry 2 of every species, that'd be about 17,500 variations of animals. So 2 of them, that'd be about 35,000. Total around 70,000 animals is what you would end up with. It just so happens that if you take like an elephant and a lizard and you average it out, the average size animal in the world is about the size of a sheep. And again, I don't think Noah was going and getting the biggest elephant he could find. He probably got a couple baby elephants, right? So if you go get the smallest of all the various creatures and put them on, and again, if you're averaging out to about the size of a sheep, that would be about 136,560 sheep-sized animals. That would only take up half of the space of the ark. So the ark could easily have fitted all the various species of animals. And again, you say, well, how would that do? How would you get them on there? God did it. I mean, this is a supernatural thing. I mean, God giving Noah the design of how to build it, the kind of wood, the pitch, the ability to persist for 100 years and keep working at it. And then when he lowered it, God no doubt spoke into the hearts of these animals and brought them, and Noah caged them and had the various foods and so forth. But again, I don't think that you can take God's presence and power and his supernatural working in that without it happening. It's interesting, if you look through history at that ark that landed, we do find throughout history people saying they saw the ark on Mount Ararat. All the way back to 275 BC, Berosus, a Babylonian historian, wrote, "But of this ship that grounded in Armenia, some part still remains in the mountains, and some get pitch from the ship by scraping it off." Around 75 AD, Josephus said that the locals collected relics from the ark and showed them off to this very day. He also said of the ancient historians he wrote about the ark. In 180 AD, Theophilus of Antioch wrote, "The remains referring to the ark are to this day to be seen in the mountains." An elderly Armenian man in America said that as a boy he visited the ark with his father and 3 atheistic scientists in 1856. Their goal was to disprove the ark's existence, but they found it and became so enraged they tried to destroy it, but could not because it was so big and had been petrified. In 1918, one of the atheist scientists, an Englishman, admitted on his deathbed the whole story was true. In 1876, a distinguished British statesman and an author, Viscount James Bryce, climbed Ararat and reported finding a 4-foot-long piece of hand-tooled timber at the altitude of more than 13,000 feet. 6 Turkish soldiers claimed to see the ark in 1916. In the early part of this century, Russian aviator named Vladimir Brovsky claimed the discovery of the Noah's Ark. He was stationed in southern Russia near the Turkish border of Mount Ararat. As he tested a plane, he and his co-pilot flew over Ararat, discovered on the edge of a glacier what he described as a boat the size of a battleship. He said it was partially submerged in a lake, and he could see there was an opening for a door nearly 20 feet square, but the door was missing. Rovitsky told his commanding officers, and the expedition was dispatched to find the ark and to photograph it. The report was forwarded to the Tsar, who was soon overthrown, and the photos and the report perished. In 1936, a young British archaeologist named Hardwick Knight hiked across Ararat, discovered an interlocking hand-tooled timbers of height of 14,000 feet. During World War II, 2 pilots photographed something they believed was the ark on Mount Ararat. And there are many other recent attempts to find documents of the ark. Years ago, we actually had John Morris, the son of Henry Morris, the great scientist, who had been many times to Mount Ararat. And one of them, we actually helped fund it for him to go up there because the height of it, it has to be a super, super warm summer to get the snow low enough to see the ark, but it can't be too wet where you can't get there. But they even in the middle of summer, they can still have serious snowstorms, and it's incredibly dangerous. But also, it is on 3 different countries claim that area, and they're always at war with each other, and so it's quite difficult. But he wrote a book on it as a kid. He read all the various things, and it's a very interesting book. It's actually, he wrote it, and it was for kids. But he talks about the various times he went up to Mount Ararat, and he actually had some amazing stories of how God met him. But the various tribes at the bottom of Mount Ararat, I mean, they for as long as back as they can remember, in their lineage, their ancestors helped tour people to go see Mount Ararat. That was how they made their living around the world, and some very, very interesting stories. Well, back in Genesis 6, verse 17, behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which the breath of the life, everything that is on the earth, shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you and your sons and your wives and your sons' wives with you. And every living thing on the flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. And they shall be male and female. And of the birds, after their kind, of animals, after their kind, of every creeping thing, of the bird after its kind, and 2 of every kind will come into you to keep them alive. And you shall take for yourself all food that is eaten, and you shall gather it into yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. Thus Noah did, I love this, according to all that God commanded him, so he did. Hopefully we can say that. We found grace in God's eyes. We walked righteously in our generation, no matter what the entire rest of the world is doing. Noah was one guy that could say to his kids, you listen to me, I'm right. Everybody else is wrong. And he was right. And he just continued to follow the Lord. I'm not going to read it tonight, but in Ezekiel 14:14, it mentions Noah and Daniel and Job, 3 guys that were living in wicked civilizations and generations of godless people who did not get spiritually things appraised correctly. But Noah was one of those great men. In 2 Peter 2:5, it again mentions that Noah was one of 8 people on the entire planet, a preacher of righteousness. And in Hebrews 11:7, I will read this. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of the things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of righteousness, which is according to faith.